In this video, I'm going to teach you how to capture and create the most cinematic footage using your GoPro Hero 13 Black. This video is going to have four main sections. The first section is going to be the tools you need. The second section is going to go over all the settings you need to know. The third section is going to talk about techniques. And the fourth section is going to talk about editing. And in the fourth section, I am going to talk about a free pack of LUTs that I have available for you to download in order to easily grade your GoPro Hero 13 Black footage. These LUTs are absolutely free. I don't want any of your personal information. There's just a simple link where you can download them and enjoy them. So first of all, there are two tools that you need in order to capture that cinematic footage with your GoPro Hero 13 Black. The first tool is a gimbal. Now the gimbal that I personally recommend is the Hohem iSteady Pro 4. And the reason I recommend this gimbal is it does everything you need it to do, but it's very budget friendly. This gimbal can be purchased for less than $100. And the main reason you need this gimbal is because in order to film that cinematic footage, you're going to want to use the 180-degree shutter angle. And what that means is if you're filming in 24 frames per second, you're going to have a shutter speed of 1/48 on your GoPro Hero 13. And if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, you're going to have a shutter speed of 1/60. The reason you'll want this gimbal when using those shutter speeds is you want to ensure there isn't any jitter or ghosting in your footage. When you have Hypersmooth turned on your GoPro, it needs a fast enough shutter speed in order to work properly. And usually that shutter speed is about 1/192 or faster. The shutter speeds of 1/48 or 1/60 are much slower, and Hypersmooth will not function properly at those speeds, and you'll get jitter and ghosting in your footage that makes it unusable. But with this gimbal right here, you can still keep Hypersmooth turned on, and this gimbal is going to be just enough to prevent any of those micro jitters or shakes in your footage. So you can get extra stable footage with this gimbal while still using the 180-degree shutter angle. And the reason we want that 180-degree shutter angle is it has that proper level of motion blur. And that proper level of motion blur is going to give you that really cinematic looking footage. And tool number two that you'll need is this pack of ND filters right here. Now I have tried out the new pack of ND filters from GoPro that GoPro created for the Hero 13 Black, but these ones right here from Freewell are my favorites. And the reason is these cost less than the GoPro ND filters while still working just as well. But in addition, these also have a polarizer on here. And that polarizer makes it easy to get great footage on bright sunny days, or if you're near water. It helps eliminate some of that reflection in the footage. And I'm going to show you how to use these ND filters when we talk about the settings portion of this video. So next, let's talk about how to mount your GoPro Hero 13 Black on this gimbal right here. What you want to do is you want to have this part here with the orange on the downside. And then what you want to do is you want to see the iSteady Pro 4 here. It should be upright. And this should be at the back where it says iSteady Pro 4 right here. And you're just going to set your GoPro on here with the screen facing toward the back. And then you're going to take this orange clip right here and you're just going to put it down in that notch right there. And then your GoPro is attached. And all you have to do at this point is pivot this around. And to turn it on, you're just going to take the power button right here and you're going to hold it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you can control your GoPro via Bluetooth with this gimbal. I typically don't do that though. I prefer the remote, or I prefer just using my phone because I find it's not always consistent with this gimbal. And after all, it is a budget gimbal. And what we're using it for is the mechanical stabilization. And as far as which modes I use on here, I generally like to use the PF mode or the L mode. The PF mode is pan follow. And when you're using that mode, your GoPro is going to pivot slowly in the direction you're going, which is nice because it gives you those nice smooth movements. And I really like that aspect of it. But then if you want your GoPro to not move much at all and to stay locked into place, you'll want to use the L mode. And if you're in the L mode, your GoPro isn't really going to move left or right or up or down. It's going to stay in place with wherever you're pointing your gimbal. So depending on what techniques you want to use for the scenes you're filming will depend on which gimbal mode you'll want to use. And another nice feature of this gimbal that I like to mention, it does have the tripod feet that can be attached to it. So anytime you want to do those static shots, especially if you're solo creating, you can easily set your gimbal down with your GoPro on it and you can film those shots. So next, let's talk about the settings that you need to key in to your GoPro to get that cinematic footage. First of all, you want to make sure you're in video mode. And once you're in video mode, you're going to tap down here at the bottom. And technically, you can select any of these on the menu. I'm going to select that top one right there. And what we want to do first of all, starting off, is we want to select the profile, and we want to do log because we want to get that footage later on that we can really make look extra cinematic. For the framing, this is going to be up to you. I generally like to use the 8x7 because it uses the entire sensor and it gives you almost a square output later on that you can then adjust quite a bit and reframe it when editing. But if you know you're not going to want to do that, you can select 16:9. And then next for the resolution, you'll definitely want to select 5.3K. 5.3K is 91% higher resolution than 4K. And when you export 5.3K as 4K, it's going to really give a noticeable boost in that resolution. For the frame rate, you're going to want to select either 24 or 30. Here in the United States, most movies are filmed in 24 frames per second, and most TV shows are filmed in 30. I personally prefer 24 frames per second, and that's the one I'm going to work with here. For the digital lens, you only have one option of wide. But if you do want more options, you will have to go up here to 16:9, and then you'll have the full array of options there. So there are situations where I like to use linear plus because I want to have the horizon lock. And if I'm in those situations where I don't want the horizon to change, I will use that. And then I do have to work with the 16:9. I'm not able to reframe that later on, but most of the time I do film in wide. The main instances where I use linear or linear plus, or if I don't want any of that fisheye or distortion, like if I'm around city buildings or if I'm filming subjects in such a way that they're on the edge of the frame, then I like to use that so that it doesn't give that fisheye look. And it's also worth mentioning, if you want to have any 5.3K 60 footage that you can do some slow motion with later on a 24 frames per second timeline, you can slow that 60 frames per second footage down to 40% of the original speed. You will have to select 16:9 for that as well, because in 8x7, you of course can only go up to 30 frames per second. So for the capture settings here, I don't change any of those. And it is important, if you have used zoom before, you want to make sure you keep that at 1x. You don't want any zoom going on. You can always crop your footage later on and do the zoom in that way. But if you do the zoom in camera, it's digital zoom and it's going to degrade the quality of your footage, and that is not going to be cinematic. Under the Pro Tune settings are where there's some really important settings here to key in. First of all, for bit depth, that's going to be grayed out because this is automatically 10-bit when you have those settings, which is good. You want 10-bit. For the bit rate, you want to make sure that is set to high. You want to get the very highest bit rate possible. And this next setting is a key one. This is the shutter speed. So by default, it's set to auto. But if you were filming in 24 frames per second, you're going to want to set this to 1/48. And if you're filming in 30 frames per second, you're going to want to set it to 1/60. Since I'm filming in 24, I set it to 1/48. For the EV comp, that will be grayed out because we're in the log mode. For the white balance, we want to make sure that's set to native. It's going to make it easiest to really grade and fine tune later on. For the ISO min, we want to set this to 100. And for the ISO max, we want to set this to 800. This is going to help ensure that the camera doesn't go above ISO 800. And in a moment when we use the ND filters, I'm going to show you the secrets to knowing how to get the proper ND filter. For the sharpness, we want to make sure this is set to low. Cinematic footage is not overly sharp. It is footage that has a nice, balanced, somewhat soft look to it. And if your footage is too sharp, it's not going to look good, and it's definitely not going to look cinematic. And then for the denoise, we also want the set to low. And the main reason we can have that set to low is because when we're working with the shutter speed and the ND filters, and with our ISO max at 800, we're not going to have to really worry about noisy footage. And with denoise set to low, that footage is going to have the most detail, and it's not going to have that artificial softness that's added to it with the denoising in camera. And for the color mode, that of course is going to be grayed out because we are using log, which with GoPro is called GP log. And for the audio settings down here, I'm going to leave those at their defaults. If you are doing any audio with your footage that you want to be good, I highly recommend using an external mic. In my case, I like to use the DJI Mic 2 with this camera. And what I like to do is I like to record internally to that mic and then sync the audio later on. I don't like to use the audio via Bluetooth because that is going to be lower quality audio. But when I record this internally and then sync it later on, I can get that 32-bit float, and it's going to be the highest quality audio. You of course could get the media mod and you could have a microphone attached, but the problem is if you are mounting this on the gimbal, it's not going to allow for you to have the media mod because there's not enough room. So that's why I like having the DJI Mic 2 attached externally and recording internally to that microphone module. So now that we've keyed in those settings, we're going to go back to the main screen and we're going to quickly see a problem here. The problem is the footage is way overexposed. Now, if you look down here at the bottom, this is a QR code that I used with the GoPro Labs firmware. If you haven't heard of GoPro Labs before, it is a free firmware that GoPro has where you can unlock some additional features. And one of those features is the ability to see the ISO and shutter speed levels at all times. If you'd like to learn more about that firmware and how to set it up on your camera, I've linked to a video above where I go through a full presentation on that. But if you are going to be using ND filters with your GoPro, I do highly recommend at least applying this QR code here, because that is going to give you the ability to really fine-tune your ND filters and make sure you're using the proper one. But if you don't want to set that up, that's fine. There are still some visual ways where you can look at the screen and get a pretty good idea of which ND filter you should be using. But right now, our footage is way overexposed. It's nearly entirely white, and our ISO is all the way down as low as it can go at 100, and our shutter speed, of course, is 1/48. So what we need to do is we need to take off the lens cover right here, and we need to put an ND filter on. So for the ND filters in this pack from Freewell, we have ND4, ND8, ND16, and ND32. So with the current lighting, I'm going to start with ND16, and I'm going to see if that gives us enough ND effect to balance the exposure. So in order to remove the lens cover, you're just going to pull out slightly, and you're going to twist to the right, and it's going to pop right off. And then when you're putting on the ND filter, you just want to make sure the blue dot on the filter, that blue dot lines up with the corresponding blue dot on the GoPro lens. So you're going to line those up, and then you're going to twist to the right while pushing in, and then the ND filter is going to attach. And the nice thing about these Freewell lenses is your GoPro will detect it up here at the top. So right now it shows ND16, because if you use the GoPro ND filters, it also detects it at the top as well. But in this case, we have our ISO still at 100, and of course our static shutter speed at 1/48. So right now that exposure looks pretty good, but it still looks like it could be slightly overexposed in the sky. And we definitely don't want to overexpose because we're going to lose details in our highlights. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to take ND16 back off, and I'm going to apply ND32. So now that we've got ND32 on, you'll notice we have our ISO slightly higher. Our ISO is sitting right around 205, and we of course have the static shutter speed at 1/48. So what that means is the GoPro had to boost the ISO slightly to balance that exposure. So that means we do have a dark enough ND filter on. And of course up here at the top, it does show ND32 as well. So now that we've got the right ND filter on, I want to talk about some tips and tricks to know which ND filter to select. So first of all, if your ISO is at 100 and your image still looks too overexposed, you need to use a stronger ND filter. So let's say I had put on ND8 in this case. We can see that the ISO is at 100 and the image is overexposed. So that's how we would know we need a stronger ND filter. So let's take ND8 back off, put on ND32. And of course, we already know ND32 is the right one for these particular lighting conditions. But let's say with ND32, let's say our ISO was higher. So I'm going to block this here. So you can see when I block it, the ISO goes up. Let's say our ISO does say 500, 600, or all the way up to 800, which it's quickly heading toward. If our ISO was to be that high, we would want to put on a lower ND filter, because that would mean our ND filter is too dark and it's forcing the camera to raise the ISO to balance the exposure. So when I take my hand away, that would mimic putting on a lower ND filter. Basically, anytime the ISO is between 100 and 400, that's a pretty good sign that you have the proper ND filter on. And one other note I'd like to make here, if the ISO is 400 to 800, you probably want to put on the next step lower. And one other note I'd like to make is if you want to, you could set a static ISO for the min and the max. So ideally, you want to have that ISO as close to 100 as possible. But what I have found is setting a static ISO, I usually end up with a slightly overexposed or underexposed frame. So that's why I do set the range from 100 to 800 so that the GoPro can adjust the ISO. If my lighting is changing slightly or if I turn to a different direction, it can adjust it to make sure the exposure is balanced. So that's why I do have that range set there. And of course, the polarizing effect on here, you can change that by rotating this right here. So you won't notice a big change right here. It's kind of more subtle. If we were around a bright ocean, or if it was a bright sunny day and we were pointing at the sky toward the sun, you would notice a little bit difference in the shade of blues in the sky. But if you'd like to use the maximum polarization effect, this white line right here on the filter is going to be your guide. So with that white line, you want it pointed basically right here at the middle of that text, right around the 32. It's going to represent the maximum application of the effect. And then the least application of the effect would be having this turned in the opposite direction. So the line opposite of the text here. But when I'm using these with the polarizer, I like to keep this on the maximum effect because that's why I'm using them to begin with. And it's going to yield the best looking footage. So for section number 3, I'm going to talk about some of the basic techniques you need to keep in mind when filming cinematic footage. So the great thing about this gimbal is this gimbal does offer you a lot of options and flexibility with different angles and perspectives you can capture. But a few basic rules for cinematic footage is, first of all, you want to make sure you tell your story with a variety of different scenes. In general, what I recommend is for each scene, you want to have a couple wide angle shots where you're further from your subject. And then you want to have a few mid-range shots where you're closer to your subject. And finally, you want to have some closer shots where you're much closer to your subject. But since we're working with an action camera here, and an action camera has a minimum focal distance, you always want to keep in mind you want to have your GoPro at least 12 to 18 inches back from your subject. And in general, I like to be about 2 feet away just to be safe. And the reason for that is if you're any closer than that, your subject is going to be blurry. That footage is not going to be usable. But the great thing about the GoPro is it does have 5.3K. So with that 5.3K footage, you can easily crop it and you're not going to lose all that much resolution. So for your close-up shots, I recommend cropping those scenes for best results. In addition, when filming your scenes, you want to keep in mind that you want to use different angles. So one thing you can do with this gimbal is you can, of course, hold it here. You can have it at head height, which is fine. But you want to make sure you don't have all of your shots filmed at that shoulder to head height. You want to have some lower to the ground. And with this, you can even hold it upside down. So if you want to get shots of feet or somebody stepping on a step, walking over a log, anything like that, you can easily do that. And you can follow someone and really show that motion blur that you're going to get while moving along if your camera is close to an object like the ground, a fence, anything like that. So there are also some shot composition rules you'll want to keep in mind. First of all, if there is anybody's face in your frame, you generally want to keep their eyes along that top third. It's going to be generally the best shot composition. And if somebody is moving left to right in your frame or right to left, you generally want to have 2/3 of the frame in front of the direction they're moving. So in this case, I'm in this third of the frame, and then I'm moving this way. So I've got 2/3 of the frame in front of me. It does help to get some creative shots in there as well. So these might be shots of objects that you're not normally filming, different things that you can think of in your scene that are more unique to throw in there. It's going to make your story more interesting. So now that we've talked about all the tools, settings, and techniques you need to know, once you've captured your footage, it's time to edit and grade that footage to finish off those cinematic results. So I'm going to go back inside and I'm going to show you how to do that. So now we're going to talk about how to grade that GoPro Hero 13.9 Black footage. So I'm going to use Adobe Premiere Pro. If you're using Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve, these steps are going to essentially be the same, but they're going to look a little bit different. So what I've done is I've created a project here and I've imported my sample clips and I'm going to drop those on the timeline. You may see this message in your video editor of choice. You can just click Keep Existing Settings. And the reason you're going to see that is because I filmed in 8:7, but I'm going to show you how to get those to 16:9. So what we can do here with this first one is we want to drag this to the right and we want to get it until the black on the horizontal and vertical disappears, which with 5.3K footage on a 4K timeline, that's going to be right about 73. But if you remember, I talked about how you have extra vertical and horizontal resolution. So if you look here, if I drag it on the vertical axis, we have a lot of extra footage to work with. So for now, I'm just going to keep it at the center, which would be 1080. If I need to make adjustments with each clip later on, I can do that. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click copy, and then we're going to highlight our other clips, and I'm going to click on one of them. I'm going to click paste attributes, and I'm going to select motion. What that's going to do is it's going to make all these clips at 73 for the scale. So if we go through them here, you can see all of them are no longer that 8:7. They are in the 16:9 aspect ratio now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to apply my LUTs. And then I'm going to do a little basic grading to show you how to fine tune your grade to really get that cinematic looking footage. So the first clip I want to work with here is this one right here. It's a pretty simple clip. Approaching the tree, my youngest son enters the frame, then another son enters, and I'm rotating around the tree while they're touching the tree. So what I want to do for this one is I want to, first of all, apply the conversion LUT. So the conversion LUT is converting this GP log footage to a Rec 709 color space. And that Rec 709 color space is the color space we need when sharing this video on YouTube, unless we were sharing it in HDR, in which case we would want a different color space. But since I didn't film this in HDR, we want to convert the log to Rec 709. So the way we can do that is we can go over here, and first of all, you want to make sure you have the Lumetri color tab available here on the right. If you don't see that there, go up to Window and select Lumetri color. And also, while you're at it, make sure Lumetri scopes is selected. Lumetri scopes is this right here, and I'll show you later on why this matters, but we do want to have this here when fine-tuning our edits. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to Basic Correction. We're going to go to Input LUT. We're going to go to Browse, and we're going to navigate to our folder right here that has my LUT pack in it. And we want to select GP log to Rec 709 neutral. This is going to be that conversion LUT, so it's not going to apply any special look or feel to that footage. It's just going to apply a simple GP log to Rec 709 conversion. And when I click open, you can see a pretty dramatic change there. Obviously, the image becomes a little more saturated, and the colors expand quite a bit further on our waveform here, which, by the way, on our Lumetri scopes, the waveform, anything in 0 to 20 is the shadows. Anything in 80 to 100 is the highlights. So the shadows are going to be the darker part of our image, like down in here. The highlights are going to be the brighter part. And then basically anything between 80 and about 20 is going to be our midtones. So that's what this right here represents. So if I was to toggle this back off the LUT, you can see how these are less expanded. Now, the highlights part of our scene in this particular image is already pretty bright. So there's not a lot of room to work with there, but the shadows, we definitely have some room to work with. So after I apply that conversion LUT, if you like how that looks and you don't want to change anything else, great. But if you want to stretch this a little bit further, the way in which you do that is you go over here to curves, and you're going to click on this white dot right here, and you're going to put a dot by left clicking here, here, and here. Basically, wherever the horizontal and vertical lines cross, where this white line also goes over them, you're going to put a dot. And this region down here represents shadows. This in the middle represents midtones, and this represents highlights. So if we bring down the shadows a little bit more, we can add some contrast to our image. And then the highlights, if we want to bring them up a little bit more, we can add contrast there as well. Now in this particular scene, like I said, the highlights are already pretty much at 100. You don't want to go over 100 because they're going to be blown out. They're going to lose detail. Just the same with the shadows. You don't want to go below 0. Otherwise, those are going to be too dark, and those are going to lose detail there as well. So for highlights, I'm not going to expand them on this particular scene, but I am going to have the shadows brought down a little bit further. So already that looks really nice from where we started. If we toggle where we already started, that's where we started, and that's where we're at currently. So I like how that looks. So I'm going to leave that scene for now, and I'm going to go to this scene right here, where we're walking out on a pier over the water. Now this scene, I'm going to show you some of my other LUTs so you can see how those look. So we're going to go back to Basic Correction. We're going to go to Input LUT and Browse. And the first one I'm going to do is Classic Cinematic Look. I'm going to click Open. So I really like my Classic Cinematic Look. If you were looking for just one LUT that does it all for your footage with my LUT pack, I recommend this one right here. And what this one does, the way I've configured it, I've done a bunch of curve adjustments. And first of all, it adds deeper contrast. So it does add darker shadows, brighter highlights, but it still keeps it within that range, provided you film with the settings that I showed you. But at the same time, it also adds a slight bit of green in the shadows and a little bit of red in the highlights. And what I like about that is it has that real classic cinematic look and feel to it. It looks really good. Let's toggle this off so you can see before and after. This is before and this is after. And by the way, you don't have to add the conversion LUT when applying any of these other LUTs. The conversion LUT is already built into them. Wanted to make it as easy as possible for you. So let's say you wanted the scene to have a little bit of a colder feel to it because it was a pretty cold day this day. I'm going to select cold. And when cold applies, you can definitely see and feel those blues. Like it makes the scene feel a lot colder. Cold, I recommend if you have any skiing or outdoor winter adventures with your GoPro. Cold is a great one to apply. It really gives that feel to it. But let's say this was a hot summer day and you wanted to convey that through your color. We're going to go here and we're going to select warm. And warm, I really like not only for summer tropical type things, but I also like warm for fall because warm has a lot of those oranges in there and it really has that nice fall-y feel to it. Warm is also good for any of those sunrise or sunset scenes. It does really well for that. And finally, my other LUT in this folder is called that blue-orange look. So this one, when I apply it, it's a little more subtle, but what this does is it has blues in the shadows and a little bit of orange in the highlights. And this can look really nice with some specific scenes. I tend to like this in more urban areas, that type of thing. I feel like the feel of this goes well with that. So with this particular scene, I don't like it applied here. But if you have any, like, let's say this one right here, if I apply it here, I like how it looks a little bit better. Like it in this type of setting. You can see the orange on the tree there, the blue in the sky, the little bit more blue feel in the shadows here. And I really like how that looks for particular scenes. But again, it's going to depend on the scene and what you like best, and also what type of story you're trying to tell. So this one, I think I would like that classic cinematic look. Yeah, that one right there. It's subtle. These LUTs are all subtle. They're not going to make drastic changes to your footage that make them look really cartoony and bad, but it's those subtle looks that are really going to help your footage look really good. And I'm going to apply classic cinematic to this one as well. I really like how that looks with this particular scene. My boy's playing with that really cool old gnarly tree. So there you go. That is how you create cinematic footage using your GoPro Hero 13 Black. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe and bell notification button so that you're notified every time I publish a new video. Until we talk again, happy cinematic filmmaking.